This is part 5 of a series where I go through the entire Talmud, specifically Chapter 5 of Book 1, Tractate Berachot. Chapter 5 begins with a Mishnah discussing the level of focus necessary while praying. Specifically, it should be with great focus and submission. Some particular people would wait an hour prior to prayer in order to prepare. Your focus should be to such an extent that if a king greets you or if a snake comes over to you, you shouldn't interrupt your prayer. The Gemara states that this focus is derived from the story of Hannah, who prayed with great intensity and focus. Well, maybe that was an exception over there, because Hannah was extremely distressed. Okay, so we learn it from King David, who prayed with great intensity. Again, that may be an exception, because King David was distressed over the whole Bathsheba incident. So, there are many interpretations of King David's verses. Some say it means you have to wear nice clothes while praying. Some teach it to mean in general you shouldn't have excessive joy and should temper it. The exception being if you're wearing tefillin, as that caused one sage to be super happy. Furthermore, there's a story where there was a wedding and everybody was getting a little bit too joyful, so one sage took a super expensive cup and smashed it. There were similar things that happened at many weddings. To this day, there is a custom to smash a glass by a wedding to remind ourselves of the sadness of the destruction of the Second Temple and our exile, even during a joyous day like a wedding. In addition to this point, if you're praying right after learning, don't begin prayer after learning a complex, highly debated subject, as it'll preoccupy your mind during prayer. Rather, pray after learning a conclusive law that's not debated, like certain laws of purity, tithes, or consecrated animals. Also, don't go into prayer right after being sad, lazy, chatting, laughing, etc. Rather, go into prayer after doing a good deed. Similarly, you should only leave a conversation in general with a discussion of Torah, not any of the above frivolous things. Some say you do this so you'll think well of that person you just finished talking to. There is an example of this occurring where there's a story where two sages were walking by some palm trees in Babylon, and one said that those palm trees had been there since the time of Adam, and there's a verse which teaches that every land Adam decreed would be settled was eventually settled in, and every land he said would remain uninhabited remained uninhabited. Also, in addition, students should accompany their teachers around. Back to prayer. You should have great focus, again sourced from some verses, and it's taught that Rabbi Akiva prayed shorter when he was leading the congregation, but when he prayed by himself he would do it for hours and would end up walking all across the room from all the bows he was doing. Also, you should try to pray in a room with windows, as Daniel did, again based on a verse. Similarly, a lot of the more precise laws of prayer, such as to do it 3 times at different times facing Jerusalem, saying the Amidah quietly, to ask for stuff for yourself after praying God, not to be drunk during prayer, and many others, are learned from several biblical figures such as Daniel, Hannah, and King Solomon. There are, in fact, several things that can be learned from the whole Hannah story. The story being that there was this woman named Hannah who was barren, so she prayed at the temple, and the high priest, Eli, thought she was drunk, so tried to kick her out. She explained what was going on, and she was blessed with a kid. So we can learn from that things such as that someone who prays while drunk is considered like doing idolatry. If you suspect someone of doing something they didn't do, you should appease them and then bless them afterwards. And that when Hannah prayed for a son, she called God Lord of Hosts, the first time such a term was ever used, and prayed that as God had made the whole world, she should be able to have just one son, comparable to a king who was at a great feast, and a beggar who requests just a piece of bread. Furthermore, based on some double wording in the verse, it's taught that she kind of threatened God because she said that if she didn't have a kid, she would seclude herself with another man besides for her husband and be accused of being unfaithful, even though she wouldn't have been, and then have to go through the sota ceremony, which, when it's proven that she did no wrong, the blessing is to have children. So that was going to be her strategy to have kids. According to some, however, that wouldn't have worked because the blessing is actually that if you already have kids, then they're going to be better, be it birthed painlessly or more attractive or something along those lines. Not that you'll start having kids. So, according to that, the double wording she used in the Torah is just an expression. Also, in Hannah's prayer, she referenced herself as being a servant to God 3 times, referencing either 3 things that a woman is likely to pass away from, or to 3 of the special commandments towards women, the laws of female purity, separating challah, and lighting Shabbos candles, all of which Hannah was very careful to do. In addition, when Hannah asked for a child, she said, an offspring of men. This is either interpreted to mean a very great man, a man who would anoint 2 men to royalty, being King Shaul and King David, or to be equivalent to 2 great men, Moshe and Aaron. And according to some, it means just that her son should be inconspicuous, average, be it in height, size, looks, or intelligence. Also, based on the verse, it teaches that Eli, the Kohen Gadol, stood a bit away, specifically 4 cubits, which is the distance you should be from somebody who's praying. There's also another teaching based on some words here and some terminology later that she prayed that her son not be punished when he later taught something in the presence of his teacher, being the Kohen Gadol Eli, something about the laws of priestly sacrifice, which apparently made him liable for the death penalty, and God offered to give her a new child, but she said, "For this child I prayed," meaning not another. It also says that Hannah spoke on her heart, the implication she was asked why her body was made in such a way if she wasn't going to be able to have a child. Bit of a side point, somebody who fasts on Shabbos, it's considered so great that a negative decree against him, even up to 70 years, is torn up. However, you're also punished for violating the commandment of enjoying Shabbos, so to make up for it, you should do another fast during the next week. Okay, back to Hannah. It's taught that she actually kind of spoke a bit disrespectfully to God through all this, similar to what Elijah the prophet and Moshe did. Side point, it's taught that God assists people to do the right thing, and if he didn't, things would have fallen apart a long time ago, from all of these verses listed here. In regards to Moshe speaking to God, it's explained that he argued on the behalf of the Jewish people after the golden calf, that only happened because God had decided to give tons of gold and silver to them after they left Egypt, so therefore they built the golden calf. This is akin to the saying that a lion does not roar before a basket of straw, but it does before a basket of meat, or to the example of someone who fed a cow good food and then it started kicking them, or the example of somebody who gives their son fancy food, clothes, and money, and then leaves him outside of a brothel, at which point he sins. So that's comparable to the whole thing with the Jewish people receiving a ton of gold and silver and then sinning with the golden calf. Based on this, there's a teaching that overeating is a type of sin, as it could lead to these types of issues. In fact, based on some later verses, the implication is that God actually conceded the point that maybe giving them all that gold and whatnot wasn't such a great idea. There are some other points about Moshe and God by the golden calf, how Moshe initially was rejected and then tried again and managed to convince God, comparable to a man who stops a king from severely punishing his son. In fact, it says that he grabbed God in a manner comparable to how a person would grab another person by their garment in order to convince them. God offered Moshe to be the new and only forefather of the nation, but he argued no, if the original nation, with 3 patriarchs, was insufficient, then for sure 1 wouldn't be enough. And in addition, he wanted to give him another chance, or it would even look badly on him. It said Moshe prayed to the point where he either became extremely ill, or to the point where his vow was nullified, or to the point that he gave his life, and managed to bring out God's divine attribute of mercy. He also argued on the point of God's eternal oaths towards the Jewish people, and furthermore, the nations of the world would say that God was weak and could defeat Pharaoh, but not the 31 kings of Canaan. God eventually, of course, conceded, and it says that a student is fortunate to have his teacher concede to him in such a manner. Another thing to learn from this is the above point, that Moshe praised God first and then made requests from him. Bit of a new point. We know prayer is greater than action alone, as Moshe did many great things, but was only allowed to look at the land of Israel after he prayed a bunch for it. There's a similar thing taught, that fasting is greater than giving to charity, as charity affects your money, while fasting affects yourself. Also, prayer is greater than sacrifices, based on some verses. Very unrelated side point, a priest that has killed somebody for whatever reason may no longer perform the priestly blessing. Okay, back on prayer. It said that since the destruction of the temple, the gates of prayer have been locked, but the gates of tears remain open. God covered himself, similar to a cloudy day, which is a bad omen for prayer in general. It's as if there's an iron wall between God and the Jewish people. However, similar to Moshe, anybody that prolongs their prayer, it is answered. However, don't do that expecting it to be answered, or else you'll wind up disappointed. However, if you're not answered, don't give up and try again. In fact, there are 4 things you should constantly try to improve in: Torah, good deeds, prayer, and your occupation. Each of these is sourced from a verse. Later, in regards to all this about the golden calf, it says that God forsook and forgot us, both of them. God counters by saying he has created 12 constellations, each of which has 30 armies, each of which has 30 legions, each of which has 30 leaders, each of which have 30 leaders, each of which have 30 leaders, each of which have 365,000 stars, and all of this was only created for you, so clearly he has not forgotten about you. However, the only thing he chooses to forget about is the golden calf. Okay, back to the original topic. We said earlier that extra pious people would wait an hour prior to prayer to prepare. Some would wait an hour after too. In fact, they would wait an hour, pray for an hour, and then wait another hour, and there are 3 prayers, so that's 9 hours a day, but they were fine because the work that they did do in their day was blessed. With regards to not interrupting even if a king speaks to you, there is an exception if it's a king of Israel. However, if you see something dangerous coming towards you, be it a dangerous person or a vehicle, abridge your prayer and move out of the way, if possible. If not, you can stop and make an interruption. In fact, there's a story where somebody was praying and an officer stopped to speak to him and he continued praying, and the guy said, "That's not a very good idea, you're kind of risking your life by ignoring me." So he countered by saying that he wouldn't interrupt himself if you're conversing with a mortal king, so neither should you interrupt yourself when you're speaking to God. We say not to interrupt if there's a snake, but do interrupt if there's a scorpion, as they'll attack you even if you're standing still. We try to bring the disproof, saying we hold if somebody falls into a pit of snakes, you can presume and testify that he died, hence snakes are actually dangerous, but no, as there he's falling on top of the snakes, which would provoke them, hence he's standing still here, so there's no concern. If there's an ox running towards you, you can interrupt your prayer. Generally, if it's a calm ox, you should distance yourself prior 50 cubits, and if it's a dangerous ox, just get out of eye shot. In fact, if it's a very dangerous ox, you should just hide on a roof. In regards to snakes, we end off with a story where there was this venomous snake that bit somebody and they died, so Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa took the snake and held it to prove that it's not the snake that kills the person, but it's the fact that you did something wrong, and that allows you to be liable for punishment. New Mishnah. There are a few additions to prayer made in certain points. We add a prayer for rain sometimes in the blessing about the resurrection of the dead. We add a different rain prayer in the blessing of years, and we say Havdalah in the blessing for knowledge. Rabbi Akiva says we say Havdalah as its own blessing, and Rabbi Eliezer says we say it in the blessing of thanksgiving. The Gemara says we say the rain blessing by the resurrection of the dead because their might is equivalent. The other rain blessing is said by the blessing of years as they are both about sustenance. Havdalah is said in the blessing of knowledge, as Havdalah is the blessing of the separation between Shabbos and the weekday, and that requires wisdom to differentiate, or because it's one of the weekday blessings. Knowledge in general is considered very great, and if you have it, you should not be shown compassion. The temple is comparably great, and it's said that having knowledge is as great as having the temple built in your days. Others disagree and say that it is vengeance that is great. Back on the original topic, one of the options as to when to say the Havdalah prayer was as its own blessing. Originally, it was instituted as part of the Amidah. Then they decided to make it its own service over a cup of wine because people could afford it. And then times got worse, so they decided to put it back as a prayer in the Amidah. But if you're able to do it over wine, then do it. There's a bit of an argument in this regard, and the conclusion is that if you say the Havdalah prayer in the Amidah, you must also say it over a cup of wine. Also, if you say the Havdalah prayer over wine, you for sure also need to do it in the Amidah. It's better to do both. If you messed up in both, go back to the beginning. Final policy in this regard is if you said the Havdalah blessing in the Amidah, you need to say it again over wine afterwards, similar to the rule by the Kiddush prayer. The last opinion stated earlier was Rabbi Eliezer's, that we say Havdalah in the blessing of Thanksgiving, and we actually do follow that opinion in the event that a Shabbos has a holiday fallout on the next day. There's some conversation as to who disagrees with this opinion, but that's the one we follow like. There's actually a specific formatting for this prayer too, which is the accepted version to this day. New Mishnah. There are certain verses you shouldn't say in prayer. The verse of "Your mercy is extended to a bird's nest," the prayer of Al Tov, and repeating in prayer the words Modim twice are all not allowed. The Gemara says the reason you don't say the word Modim, meaning we thank, twice, is because it implies we're talking to more than one person. We don't say Al Tov, a prayer thanking God for good, as that thanks God for only good, when we should be thanking God for everything, not just good. Some say the verse about birds is not said because it shows favor towards one specific animal, and others say not to say it as it's implying God's attribute of mercy when it's just about God's decrees. There's a story about some sages praying and one of them said the verse about the birds, but that was just because he was testing some of the others. Also, one time somebody was praying and decided to string together like 10 different ways of saying great by God's name, and was criticized because that's not really the point. It's almost deprecating, as no amount of praises can really be enough. In fact, it says on this note that everything is within God's control besides free will to have fear of God. This is a very great thing to have, although for Moshe it was easy. Back on topic. Similar to not saying Modim, thanks, 2 times, because it implies you're praising 2 gods, we also don't say the first word of the Shema prayer 2 times either. You also shouldn't say every word of the prayer 2 times either, but this is more important. What if you didn't focus properly the first time you said the word Shema and want to re-say it? Can you say it 2 times then? Well, you should have just been paying attention the first time. Not focusing on prayer is pretty unacceptable. So, new Mishnah. Continuing the prior point, if you say the words Yivarechecha Tovim, may the good bless you, this is basically heresy. If someone is the prayer leader and messes up, he should be swapped out, starting from the place where he made a mistake. Based on this, we generally try to avoid confusion for the prayer leader, so he doesn't respond Amen after the priestly blessing, and if he is the only priest available, he shouldn't say Amen unless he's certain he won't mess it up. The Gemara says, in regards to being the prayer leader, don't be over or under eager to do it. You should refuse the first time asked, be hesitant the second time, and agree the third. Bit of a side point, but it teaches there are 3 things which are harmful in excess, but good if used sparingly, being leavening in dough, salt in cooking, and refusal of being the prayer leader. If someone messes up in the Amida, he is replaced, but if it's during the first 3 blessings, you start from the beginning. If you mess up one of the middle blessings, you start from the first of the middle blessings, and similarly for the end blessings, we're starting from the first of those. Others say the middle blessings are all considered one blessing, so you could restart from wherever you left off by those. On that note, if you want to make a personal prayer during the Amida, you should do so in the middle prayers, as that's the place where you make personal requests. Before and after are improper times. There's a few stories about prayer now, one where the prayer leader was taking way too long, so some students complained, and Rabbi Eliezer defended him, saying, well, Moshe prayed for 40 days. Then there was a time where the prayer leader was praying for way too short, and Rabbi Eliezer said, well, Moshe prayed very briefly by Miriam and her leprosy. Also, we learn from Moshe's prayer by leprosy that when praying for somebody else, you don't need to mention them by name, as Moshe didn't over there. There are certain blessings we bow during, the first few and some in the middle. Just see a standard prayer book if you want to know specifics. It's good not to do additional though, unless you're the high priest who bows by every blessing. Some say, in addition, a king bows at the beginning and then stays like that for the entirety of prayer. Furthermore, there are many forms of bowing. Bowing your head, your body, bending your knees, fully prostrating yourself, etc. Some say it's enough to just bow your head. There's lots of opinions as to when to bow in the blessing of Thanksgiving. Some say not to do it at all, some say in the beginning only, some say in the end only, some say both, some only in the Hallel prayer, some say only in the prayer after eating. New Mishnah. If you pray and make a mistake, it's a bad omen for you. If you are the prayer leader and error, it's a bad omen for the congregation, as you're acting as a representative and have their status. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa would pray for sick people, and afterwards know who would get better and who would not, based on if he made mistakes, as he prayed for each individual. The Gemara says that the specific blessing that's a bad omen to mess up is the first one of the Amida, about the patriarchs, as that's the one that has a priority to focus in. The source for the fact that messing up in prayer is a bad sign for the sick guy you're praying for is based on the verse, "The Lord that creates the expression of the lips says, Peace, peace, to him that is far off and to him that is near, and I will heal him." On this note, the prophets prophesized reward for people associated with Torah scholars, be it marrying their children to them or supporting them financially, but didn't mention the reward for learning Torah itself, as that's unquantifiable. Similarly, they prophesized the times of Mashiach, but not the world to come. This, by the way, is in contradiction of the opinion that Mashiach is a more mundane, non-miraculous time, with it just being that the Jewish people will be free from the oppression of other nations and countries. Similarly, the prophets only spoke of people who repented, but never the fully righteous. This disagrees with the opinion that fully righteous people are not as good as people who repented. The reward referenced, according to some, has wine preserved since the 6 days of creation, or Eden, which has never been seen, not even by Adam, who only saw its garden, which is different. There's a story in the above topic where Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa prayed on behalf of a sick rabbi, and did so without any mistakes, and then recorded the time, and the person was healed at that exact moment. There are a few words of praise for Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, for his connection with God, particularly from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, a very prominent sage. Also, in regards to prayer, again, you should pray in a room with windows, and it's improper to pray out in a field, and it's improper to specify any of your transgressions during prayer. And with that, that brings us to the end of chapter 5.